Let me get situated here, guys. I would start turning over to 1 Samuel 25. Here. Am I good? You can hear me? They can hear me? I hope so. Okay. 1 Samuel chapter 25. So while we're turning there, what we're going to study this quarter is a very interesting study. And it's taken from Dewey found this book, Good Lessons from Bad Guys. Okay. Reading the first chapter, this man who wrote the book was worked at NASA for about 35 years. So, I guess you might say he's a rocket scientist. Okay. But he's like a lot of us have our jobs and then teaches class. And then he taught a class one time, and he's a member of the church down in Houston, I believe, somewhere down that way. And he was teaching a class, and then somebody came up after his class and said, well, I've never heard a lesson on the bad guys. And I can't remember exactly what bad guy it was right now. It was in the introduction. And so he thought, we could have a study. And that's why he wrote the book. So today we're going to be studying about Nabal. I hope I say that right. Nabal. Okay. Well, let me just tell you how I want to do this class. I really want some, other than just you guys can surprise. Now today's going to be different, but instead of you guys being surprised as to what the subject is, then I'm going to tell you next week we're going to study Ananias and Sapphira out of Acts, whatever. What is Acts? 5? Okay, Acts 5. So do your reading on not just the Bible. Start with the Bible text, of course, but then do some other reading on Ananias and Sapphira. A lot of times I get another person. I'm very, very cautious, and I try to find out who the author is before I do it, or who I believe. But Google Ananias and Sapphira. Sometimes you get some wild ideas on what's out there, and that's kind of informative. But you also get another perspective a lot of times. One of the best books I've ever read that I thought was very, very interesting was Killing Jesus by Bill O'Reilly. And even though I didn't agree with everything that he said in there, it was very interesting to get another person's perspective. And he did bring in the political, because he's very political. He brought in the political atmosphere that was going on at the time. So it gave me another perspective on that. And so if you ever get a chance to read Killing, so it's Killing series, they're very, very good. And then go back, and I always like after I read a book and I get my ideas, I go back to Google and start reading some comments and getting another perspective on that. So if you don't know it now, you'll know by the end of the quarter. I'm a massive history nut. The reason I like history so much is because it's real people doing phenomenal things in history. And the reason we read about them is because they've done these things. And Joe, when we go on travel, she calls these two little markers, side of the road. They're hysterical markers. She goes, oh, no, you're going to stop at this one too? I go, okay. All right. But anyway, let's read. This is a long chapter, and that's another reason why I would like for you guys. And I know today is a different, but I'm going to piecemeal. I know I want to be sure we catch all the things, comments that I want to say about in this lesson. So I'm not going to sit here and read the entire text right now, and I'll go in there and highlight some areas. So I'll tell you the basics of the story what we're reading about. Run from Saul. Okay. In fact, it's important if we step back into chapter 24 to see the event that happened just before this chapter, and that's where David's on the run. Saul's after him. Okay. And David has his 600 men and Saul has his 3,000. And they're after him. Well, Saul gets tired and he sees, and of course they give some landmarks that I'm not familiar with. I didn't look at a map, but here's this cave and Saul went into the cave and to refresh himself to get, he's exhausted. So he goes in there. Well, guess who is in the back of the cave, hidden? Can you imagine? It was David and his men. And David is in the back of the cave in the dark. They don't see him. And they go, wow. Can you imagine David's feelings right there? And his men go, oh man, they're right there. Okay. They don't know we're right there. And in fact, David's men said, God has delivered your enemy into your hands. Here he is. Take advantage of that. In fact, his men encouraged him to do that. God has given him to you. What more can you ask? Well, do you know what David did? Of course, David, in fact, he went and he cut off the edge of the robe. And it was during that time, as I read it, if I understand the reading correctly, it was during that time that he got a change of heart. He goes, no, I can't do this. I can't. He might have been ready with a sword to kill him. But he says, no, I can't do this to God's anointed. Now, remember this. Had David been anointed already at this time? I think he had. I'm sure he had. Okay? And so if he did it to Saul, God's anointed, then that kind of left the room open so somebody else would do it to him later. But still, he honored God. He still honored God, and that was the reason he did it. He says, I can't do this. Okay? Now, I'm kind of taking some liberty here from the book. He didn't mention that, but to me, I think it's important to understand the background. Now, we also know, just knowing the story, the important part about reading the Bible is getting the story out of it, getting the lesson out of it. So things like chronologically, I don't know how long it had been from the cave time until the time that he had dealings with Nabal. We don't know what length of time that we're talking about, but the importance is the story that was left for us. I think it's important to know David's feelings, David's belief as we get into chapter 25. Okay, and so you want to go back if you want to go back and kind of do a refreshing of this lesson, and you want to read chapter 25 of Samuel. I suggest you go back to 24, Matthew 24, and instead of the whole chapter of 24. So I think that these really kind of fit together. But also there's just a little bit of a snippet in verse 1 of chapter 25. And Samuel died, and all Israel gathered together and mourned for him and buried him at his house in Ramah. And David arose and went down to the wilderness of Paran. Okay. And Israel mourned. Now, who mourned? It says Israel, all of Israel gathered. Who's all of Israel? Well, all of Israel includes Saul and David, who are, having a confrontation with each other. So they all mourn. So, and this is a time of mourning. And you know what happens when the time of mourning of a national figure is it has a lasting effect. It has an effect on everyone, the pursuer and the pursued as well, and the men that under their guidance. So this is not just some I think we need to mention Samuel's death. No, it has a bearing on what we're about to read. Okay, so let me kind of give you a brief synopsis of chapter 25, and I still suggest that we go back to read that. Now, by the way, I read from the New American Standard Version. But in verse 2, it says, there was a man in Maon whose business was in Carmel, and the man was very rich. He had 3,000 sheep and 1,000 goats, and it came about while he was shearing his sheep in Carmel And now the man's name was Nabal, and his wife's name was Abigail, and the woman was intelligent and beautiful in appearance, but the man was harsh and evil in his dealings, and he was a Calebite. Okay, Nabal. Does anybody know what the name Nabal means? Fool, right. Who would name their kid Fool? Okay, okay, I've heard of different things, but Nabal probably was, now this is just an assumption, but probably was a nickname, you know, probably was a nickname because uh, he probably done some foolish thing, and he's known for that. Okay, and we'll read later what his wife thinks about him. Well, and that's an interesting point, Chris. I think you got a point there, but a lot of times rich people, and we know that even today, they inherit it, and if he was a true fool, then he probably would have squandered it by now. Okay, so he probably had some dealings, but um, some intelligence to keep it. Right. And that is true. That she was very intelligent and beautiful. By the way, in the Hebrew, and this is just from what I read. Okay, this is one of the reasons why it's important to Google sometimes, because this one brought out in the book. What I like to do is kind of go get some different views. There's beautiful in appearance. Okay, there's 4 women that this term was related to: Sarah, and she was very beautiful; Rahab, the one at Jericho, the harlot; Esther, and we know Esther was beautiful. Have y'all ever seen that movie Esther recently? She was drop down dead gorgeous. I mean, good night. And she was like that, I'm sure. Okay. And now today there's Joe. She's gorgeous. Uh, she rolled her eyes at me. Okay, don't do that. No, but actually only 4: Sarah, Rahab, Esther, and Abigail. So basically, in the eyes of the men of Israel at that time, she was a knockout. And on top of that, she was intelligent. And do we know people like that today? Of course. We know people like that. Yeah. Good move there, Chris. Okay. All right. So now that has, I think that really has a bearing, not the beauty as much as the intelligence. Okay. Um, so what David did, he's out there roaming around. He's in the wilderness. He's on the run. But and when they're on the run, they're going to, where are they going to get their food unless it's from the land? Where are they going to get their support? And it's from the people in the countryside. He's almost like a Robin Hood. And some people are going to support him. Some people are going to be against him. But for the most part, the story of David and his pursuit and his fleeing from Saul is common knowledge around the area. Everybody knows what's going on. Well, he dealt well with with the people of that Nabal did, and so David sent 10 young men to Nabal and said, "Hey, I need some support. I need some food. I need some stuff. Would you be willing to give it to me?" And Nabal spurned him. Okay, let's read about that in verse. Let's start in verse 9. When David's young men came, they spoke to Nabal, and according to all these words in David's name, then they waited. Okay, basically what these 10 young men, they went to Nabal and said, David said, "Hey, give us something. Your shepherds have not wanted anything. We did not take anything from them. We guarded them. In fact, later on, one of the shepherds says that to Abigail. Hey, we were safe from all the turmoil that's going around this country, and from Saul's men and all these other men. We were safe because of David's men. We ought to repay them. We ought to thank them for it." Okay, but Nabal answered David's servants and said, "Who is David, and who is the son of Jesse? There are many servants today who are each breaking away from his master." Well, ungrateful, but very sarcastic and very condescending. Okay, first of all, he says, "Who is David?" Well, he knows who David is. Okay. And then says, who is the son of Jesse? This terminology right now is the same terminology that Saul used for David, son of Jesse. In other words, you're nothing but, you're nobody. The son of Jesse, big deal. Okay. And so he uses that same terminology as a put down, and then he adds it, kind of twist it even a little bit more. There are a lot of guys out there running from their masters. So he's taking Saul's side in effect, or actually he's taking his own side and just paying any homage to David. So what does he do? Well, David, of his 600 men, he says he took 4 of them, put your swords on, told all of them, put your swords on. He took 4 of them, and he was going to go attack Nabal. Okay. And 200 he left back. Now, 13. David said to his men, each of you gird on his sword. So each man girded on his sword, and David also girded on his sword. And about 400 men went up behind David, while 200 stayed with the baggage. Now, I was I said baggage seemed like I'm just getting a side note, by the way. Baggage. I guess they had baggage like you do at the airport or something. Now, other translations say equipment and supplies. It's interesting what the King James Version says. Okay, if y'all have King James Version, I'll go look it up. It said the 200 stayed back with their stuff. And I go, okay, stuff meant something more to the King James people than to, I guess that's why, but he stayed back with their stuff. But the young men, now, after they heard that, and here's his army, he's coming, and it's all known. So the young men that were the shepherds, and they went to Abigail. Why? Why did they go to Abigail? First of all, what do we already know about her? She's intelligent, okay, and you can talk to her, and so, but one of the young men told Abigail, Nabal's wife, saying, "Behold, David sent messengers from the wilderness to greet our master, and he scorned them. Yet the men were very good to us. We were not insulted, nor did we miss anything as long as we went about with them while we were in the fields. They were protected by them. And they were a wall to us by night and by day, and the time we were with them tending the sheep." Now, this is interesting. This is Nabal's servant saying this in 17. "Now, therefore, know and consider what you should do, for evil is plotted against our master and against all the household. And he is such a worthless man that no one can speak to him." Okay? Do we know people like that today? Do you work for people like that today? And that's basically what we're our going down the drain. Yeah. Well, and you know, you got a good point, but I bet you he felt confident in doing that because she probably knew it as well. Okay. That's very interesting. Uh, One thing that we have to be careful of, and I've been warned this throughout my career: don't say the wrong thing to the wrong people at the wrong time. And we know some cases where that happened, and these people are unemployed anymore. It may be for the best, maybe if when it's all looked at, but still, you're right. It took some courage, even if he knew, um, but he felt confident. But basically, he probably weighed the situation and said, "I can't tell him because he's he doesn't listen. He's Nabal, okay? He's the fool, and he's trying to save himself along with everything else that's there." So what does Abigail do? Okay, Abigail intercedes, and what she says to him is pretty lengthy. I would still think it would be really neat for you guys to go back and read all that, but I won't take the time right now. Um, but she goes and intercedes. I will bring out some things down in verse 29. Basically now, one thing I do want to bring out Oh, in verse 28. Let's start in 28. Please forgive. And this is Abigail talking to David. By the way, David's on his way, and there's a mountain there. So the Abigail is hidden from David's sight for a while, and that was her plan. Her plan was to do. Remember, she's intelligent. She said, "I didn't want. Can you imagine? Here's Abigail way out in the distance. He can see it, and that doesn't necessarily, you know, doesn't soften the situation. She wants to pretty much surprise him." Okay. But she purposely, and by the way, she's bringing to him all these supplies that he asked for before. She's bringing you can go back and read how much she's bringing them up, to what Nabal didn't offer, she gathered together. And it was interesting too. She couldn't do it herself. So she did have servants working. Enough to know that if he saw that at a distance, he wouldn't know if it was Abigail or Nabal or whatever. So she hid herself for a while until and she says, but look at the first thing that she said. Okay. Verse 28. Please forgive the transgressions of your maid servant, for the Lord will certainly make my Lord an enduring house. She blames herself. Please forgive the transgression of your maid servant. Why would she do that? Was it her fault? Okay, this is where I'd like to say. I mean, I don't struggle with this. I kind of understand what she's doing, but I want to get your idea. Why would she blame herself when it wasn't her fault? And this wouldn't happen. Okay, so she's blaming herself for that. Okay, what else? Anybody else got an idea? Mm-hmm. And even in that culture where it's male dominated and women don't, she still had an inner, she still had a voice in things. Yeah. Okay. Maybe what I was thinking of is maybe she could have taken some action sooner. Maybe if she wasn't there, she heard about it. She put her saying, "Hey, you know." So there's a lot of things that she probably was. Now, one of the things was that she may be, and this is one of the opinions that you get when you Google. One of the opinions is that maybe she wasn't really, wasn't blaming herself, but that's a way of cushioning and opening to David, saying, take the blame yourself, take the responsibility yourself, take that type of about take that responsibility. And that's how do we, you know, I remember when I read this. Of course, I'm a movie buff too, but there's this movie, I can't remember the name of it, Clear and Present Danger. Anyway, with Harrison Ford, and some troops get wiped out and stuff, and this guy was asking him whose fault, what happened, whose fault is it? And Harrison Ford, who was not there, it wasn't his fault, and nothing happened, but he took the blame. He said, "It's my fault." And you look back, he probably could have done something, but he didn't. He hesitated, and that might be here, but so it does kind of soften the blow, and it's a good introduction. Okay, and so she she acknowledges that who David is. In verse 29, if men rise up to pursue you and seek your life, the life of my Lord shall be bound in the bundle of the living in the care of the Lord your God. I'm always amazed. It's when we say the Lord our God, the Lord our God. David says that, biblical characters say Lord our God, but when someone outside that realm, you know, says the Lord your God, they still recognize the power of the Lord, even though it's not their God. Isn't that interesting? So she said that. The lives of your enemies he shall sling out as from the hollow of a sling. She's referring to the death of Goliath, because everybody knows David's story. Okay, they knew. I mean, that news travels fast, even without Facebook or anything else going around. Okay, news travels fast that this little kid slew a Goliath, slew a Philistine with a sling. And when the Lord has done to my Lord according to all the good that he has spoken concerning you, and has appointed you prince over Israel. Again, another another knowledge that everyone knew, and Nabal knew as well. Nabal knew this as well, that he was going to be the new king after Saul. After all this conflict is over, and Saul eventually dies, regardless of how it does, King David's going to be the next king. Anyway, in verse 31, my Lord shall have no cause of grief or pangs of conscience for having shed blood without cause, or for my Lord working salvation himself. And when the Lord has dealt well with my Lord, then remember your servant. She is knowing that the Lord God is going to take care of things, and she's stopping David from making a mistake. Now, whoa, David make a mistake. One of the things I think that, and that's another reason why I like history a lot, and the interest in the historical events that occurred. And they were human. And was David wrong in taking up arms and going after Nabal? I mean, David was a man after God's own heart. David was he blessed him, and we still, of course, we read about him today. David was a great servant of God, great child of God. Was he about to make a mistake? Yeah. Well, it's interesting to me, when you first start reading this, you think, okay, God is with David. God is going to take care of things. He took care of the Egyptians. He took care of the enemies of, when they came in at Jericho, the Philistines. I almost said Philippines. The Philistines, the Amalek. God took care of that. So why is this wrong? Okay. And let's read on. Let's see what David says. Okay. In verse 32. Then David said to Abigail, blessed be the Lord God of Israel, who sent you this day to me. Wow. David realized right then that he made a mistake. He was about to make a mistake. And so Abigail was sent to him, and blessed be your discernment, and blessed be you who has kept me this day from bloodshed and from avenging myself by my own hand. Sometimes men of God, and I hope we take this to heart, we need to realize that God is in control. Now, where did this come from? Okay. It came from a non-Jew or someone outside the children of Israel. It came from a source that you wouldn't think it would come from. How many times do we see God's hand in things, but it comes from a source that you wouldn't think would be a Christian source? Okay. I mean, we could probably, I kind of got you on the spot to think of an example, but it's probably true. You think about it. How many times have we come to our senses because an event happened that wasn't necessarily what God would condone, or that God from a person that would probably teach us a lesson that is not living a Christian life. Okay. So God is in control, and he still is today, of course. There are things that with this pandemic, regardless of our political opinions or physical opinion, people that have whatever your view is on this, whether you and I'm not going to go into that. If we say God is in control, God is in control. We believe it, and we recognize it, and that's what I love about David. David recognized that right off and said, "Blessed be the Lord God of Israel, who sent you this day to me." Wow. Okay. Right. Exactly. That's the, and I think that's one. This is probably the main reason. One of the main reasons of why God loved David so much is because he recognized his presence. Okay. Um, okay. Any other comments about that before we go on? Um, and so I think this encounter there is one of the classic encounters. I just love this encounter there about when they meet. Okay. And of course, you know, she's she's probably saying all the right words because she's intelligent. She already was very intelligent in her approach in all this, and and in that kind of, you know, God was with her. I think God was with her in as well in the way she did that, and the fact that she was very beautiful probably didn't hinder the situation, right? Um, and so what happens here now? She goes back to Nabal, and she was going to tell her, but then she realized that he was still having that feast and he was in good spirits. In other words, he was drunk. So telling him anything like this right now would not serve any purpose. So she waited until morning. So she's not going to keep anything from him. But in the morning, when the wine had gone out of him and he's not drunk anymore, he may still had a hangover. I don't know. His wife told him these things. I'm in verse 37. Told him these things, and his heart died within him, so that he became as a stone. Now, there's been some, and then 38, 10 days later, it happened that the Lord struck Nabal and he died. And so um, there's been different opinions as to what happened. He might have had a heart attack or some type of stroke or some type of something that put him into a coma or whatever. But he got sick right at that, you know, right at when she told him all that. And so he died. Okay. Um, Now, in light of that, uh, David marries Abigail, 39, and now I'm I'm not a scholar on Jew. Y'all may know some little. I mean, I read a little bit as much as I can, but I would assume back then, um, now that David is dead, uh, who's going to take care of Abigail? Okay, all his, if you go back and look how many sheep he had and goats and 3,000 sheep and 1,000 goats or whatever else he had. Um, that didn't go away just because he died. However, um, she was anybody to take care of her. So it might have been custom, and of course David would say take her as his wife, and that's a sign of respect. I think back then. Now, correct me if I'm wrong. Sign of respect, sign of you'll be taken care of. In other words, okay. Um, so and that uh, I would say that would probably be more of a respect there. But as Chris pointed out in verse 39, um, is it 39 or yeah? David heard that Nabal was dead. He said, "Blessed be the Lord, who has pleaded the cause of my reproach from the hand of Nabal, and has kept back his servant from evil. And the Lord has also returned the evildoer of Nabal on his own head." So, in other words, he's acknowledging that God kept him from doing evil, and God was the avenger. God was the person that subjected Nabal to his punishment. Okay. Now, when they took what, so anyway, she went to David, and I want to now. By the way, our classes, unless there's some other discussion, be pretty much shorter than your normal. It's not really full. I think each class has. So I'm about done. It's only 10 o'clock, so you might get an early. What do you call it? Early out or something out of class. But I do want to pull up something that, again, just like the first verse in this chapter about, Samuel died, they don't just, we don't just throw those, or God doesn't throw those verses in there just at random, just to throw it. So what caught my attention is the last verse. Now Saul had given Michal his daughter, David's wife, to Palti, the son of Laish, who was from Gilom. And here's some uh, here's some customs that I'm not aware of. Uh, Saul gave Michal, which is who his daughter gave Michal to David, and so it might have been a betrothal. They might have not have consummated the marriage or something, or I don't know what it was. But regardless of what happened in this verse, Saul, as a punishment to David, took Michal back. Okay, whether they had consummated the marriage or what, or David was on the run, he wasn't home. Michal was back with her dad, so boom, we'll take your wife away from you. And it's kind of unfortunate, very unfortunate, that women were treated that way back then. I mean, we mentioned about the voice that she had because she was intelligent, but still, women were just kind of like just a property, if you will, and they were just passed around. Yeah. So she came back sometime, right? Yeah, right. So, um, anyway, the lesson today, and I will say this as a mark: how can we take this story? It's a good story. It's a great story. How can we apply this to our lives today? Um, First of all, dealing with foolish people. Uh, how do you deal with foolish people? Now, I will say, I got Chris, Chris is an elder. We can go to him for anything, right? No. Um, I told my brother, uh, lives in Colorado Springs, and we talk pretty much on a weekly basis, if not more. And I told him just recently, I've had some, like just like anybody else, I'm not any different. Got frustrations at work, and sometimes it's best to get someone that lives far away, not connected, just to vent. Okay, just to vent. And so brother constant. In fact, he's telling me a lot of times he's saying he went through a lot of the same things with management that I am. And he's a management's management. They're gonna do what they're gonna do, and they got their own agenda. Blah 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 blah. We going on and on. But he's more than once, on many occasions, saying, regard, know what you got to. First of all, you got to be in their shoes because they got to answer to the people up above them, and then sometimes you just got to say you got to realize that they're dummies. They may not be on the front. So we kind of talk back on that. So how do we go with people that are fools? Right. Now, this Nabal was a rich guy, probably a very prominent person, like, even politically. So, regardless of what we think about our political leaders, sometimes we think of them as fools. How do we deal with that? And so, my next question is, before we wait a minute. Oh, it is 10:15. I'm looking at that wrong. Okay, sorry. I guess I went more than I thought. But how many Abigails do we have in our lives? I think that's just a matter of recognizing God's work, regardless of the source that we think. Hey, who are you to tell me this? No, God's at work. Okay. And sometimes we have to be humbled. Sometimes somebody that is not a part of our Christian fellowship or who we consider Christians tell us something. That's happened to me on more than one occasion. But remember, it's God at work. Okay. Next week, Ananias and Sapphira. And what I want to do in this class is at some point, and I might in a couple of weeks, maybe not this next lesson, but I would like to kind of submit some questions to you guys to kind of fill out before you come to class. Thank you very much.